Welcome to ARC 103. This is Media One, and this is architectural drafting, your kind of introduction to the architectural world. And there are a couple things that we want you to officially get out of the course. These learning outcomes are our guide for how we know if you've been successful in this course. And in particular, the ability to read and produce the standard architectural drawings. This is the biggest goal of the course. You need to be able to understand what you're looking at when you see a floor plan or an elevation or a section. And you need to be able to create these drawings for your own designs. And these drawings are not always the most natural way to look at a building. They are without perspective distortion, so they are flat, but they can be scaled, which is their advantage. And for some people, this comes naturally. For others, it takes a little learning. To help us with our learning, we use the Frank Ching book, Architectural Graphics. And this Francis Ching is a legend and has produced these wonderfully hand-drawn books. And these hand drawings are really the best way to learn. It's a terrific book. And we will be following along with the concepts outlined in his basic architectural graphics book. And the big question is, well, why do we draw stuff by hand anyway? Don't we just use the computers for everything? And of course, yeah, sure, we can use the computers for many things, but hand drawing in particular, it has obviously a rich tradition in the architectural profession, but it also provides us a way to draw things when we don't know exactly what we want to draw. With architectural projects, you often have an architectural program and a client and a site and other constraints, building codes. And we pour all of those different and conflicting requirements into a big vat, stir it around, and hopefully pour out some kind of design idea. But frequently at the early parts of design, we don't know what that's going to be. So drawing by hand provides you a media which can be very ambiguous. We don't have to know what we're drawing in advance, whereas on the computer, it's often hard to draw what you don't know what it is. So there are a number of different things that we draw in the kind of architectural concept. One of the architectural world, one of them is the ideation of concepts. So we may have a big idea. I want, I don't know, a living room that's cozy. Well, that's a great thought in concept, but what does that look like? Is it proximity to a fireplace? Is it proximity to other people? Is it a lighting effect? Is it a sense of materials? These are concepts which we need to draw in order to see if what we're thinking is feasible and what it might look like. There's also massing of buildings. Buildings are objects when you look at them from the outside. They are, of course, inhabited generally, but from the outside they are massing, and that massing is often one of the first things we address, how it sits on a site and what its lighting effects, daylighting, and all that. And then there's a whole long list of other more detailed things like space planning, diagrams, construction systems, indicating scale. There's a long list of other elements that we tend to draw. A lot of these other elements are done on the computer, though. These initial ideation drawings are the ones which are best to be drawn by hand. So what are some of these things? Well, some of them are highly conceptual in nature. So, for example, this is the City of London, where they have colored in the road system in purple and left everything else white. And it makes for a very fascinating diagram. And what does it tell us about the city? Well, we're not actually sure. And how does that affect our project? Well, we'd have to study it. But this concept is based very much on a sort of geographic understanding of a project, or trying to come up with a geographic understanding. Whereas this diagram is more purely abstract in nature. Perhaps this idea is a more artistic or abstract concept, and that's okay. We can use hand drawing to deconstruct these concepts. So, for example, if your concept is a pomegranate, you can pull apart different elements of that basic concept idea and see what if any sort of ideas can be pulled off of it. And these are all sort of basic foundations of design types of concepts: balance, pattern, color, texture. These are all things which can be used when you are creating your architectural project. And of course, you have to have some kind of concept, and sometimes the concept doesn't make itself apparent until later in a project. But sometimes you begin with that concept, and it really provides a great inspiration. Continuing with this ideation idea, you can draw to show transformations, how that concept becomes something more architectural. This is pretty sci-fi sort of looking, but you can see that there is a kind of graphical or three-dimensional mutation which is going on from the basic idea, which is a kind of weird-looking fly, to something which is more of an architectural expression. And you can use these hand-drawn drawings. These are very suggestive sketches, again, culled off of the internet. And they are quick, they're tiny, they don't have a lot of detail, but you can see that each one is trying to kind of capture almost a cartoon of what an experience is like. And that is often what we are designing as architects and interior architects, is the experience in a place. And, that experience is, of course, framed by the built environment which we create, and the framing and the staging. But the experience is really the foundation of what we design. So you can explore that in hand drawing quite quickly without having to model an entire, fish tank with all that sort of stuff. As far as studying massing goes, again, when you draw, you can quickly come up with ideas for a shape of a building or a shape of the interiors inserted into that building just by using simple drawings before you go and actually build out a whole complex three-dimensional architectural model on the computer, or in reality a physical model. You wouldn't build a physical model from the start, although you might come up and build a massing model. Other things that you can show are things like scale. Just by using the same pattern but at different sizes or different orientations, you can see that this scale figure, that's why it's called a scale figure, it's a person, that indicates on the upper left, for example, those are huge panels of, stone. And then on the image below it, you can see, that's a tiny little tile pattern on a wall. And just by the way you represent it graphically, you can indicate that scale simply and easily. Now, other things, of course, are full-on design visualization. And what that means is creating a sense of what this space will actually look like, or this building will actually look like. Now, these do not have to be full of details about materials and their finishes and all that. But they can be, because eventually you do go onto the computer and you can produce those full-on photorealistic renderings, which we all love. Other types of drawings that you can produce and that we do frequently are things like diagrams. These are drawings which are not real. They are not meant to be experiential in that they would mimic the way we experience the world in 3 dimensions. Instead, these are meant to study a project and explain some particular element of it. In this case, showing how the different spaces are connected across a building, but you can only be shown by kind of picking the building apart as if it was a dollhouse and showing the different pieces. And there are graphic standards when you do this. This is an architectural orthographic drawing, which is to say there's no perspective distortion. And we do things like color in where the building is cut away in order to show that we've done that there's something missing. We've cut away the front wall, we've pulled away the roof, and that fill color is called poche, and it's one of these architectural graphic standards that form the basis of our kind of drafting language. Other things we do, again, are more kind of analytical in nature. These are all studies of circulation diagrams. Are they showing an actual floor plan? Well, kind of, but kind of not. The arrows, the lines with arrows on either end are indicative of a circulation pattern, and then the little boxes are indicative of rooms along that circulation pattern. And so you can get a sense of, oh, well, one of these has all the rooms on one side of the corridor, if you will. Another one has them spread across the corridor, and then some have different shaped rooms on either side. So it's a quick way, without having to draw an entire floor plan, you can study how that project is configured and planned out. And it's a kind of shorthand or a distillation of how the project is put together. There's also, at the far opposite end of the architectural spectrum, there are detailed drawings. These are actual construction drawings where you figure out how everything is put together and you work through all the bits and pieces. Is it made of wood? Is it made of drywall? Is it made of metal? Are these things nailed or screwed? How do the joints work? And these types of drawings, again, are something that are part of the architectural purview. And these can be at a very detailed scale, like I showed, or they can be an entire building. And these are what we use to help a project be built. Now, and these can be beautiful drawings, don't get me wrong, just because they are detailed and architectural. This is an old kind of craftsman sort of recipe, and it's a very pretty project to look at. The drawings are quite nice, but there's enough information there that a carpenter could go and put it together. So what are the different types of architectural drawing? Well, there are some basic ones that we are going to learn about. Perspectival projection is the one that looks a lot like reality. It's a 3D representation of the architectural project at hand or an existing one. These have vanishing points. That's the big difference. If you've heard of a 1 point or a 2 point, that's what they're talking about. Those points are vanishing points. Now, this is differentiated from the other class of drawings called orthographic projection. The big difference there is there are no vanishing points. It's two-dimensional only. And these are the drawings that I mentioned earlier: plans, elevations, reflected ceiling plans, and a few other more interesting flavors. So I have dug out an old notebook that I used many years ago. And then I have dug out some of these. These, in case you haven't seen them, are pencils. And you can see that there are a number of different types of pencils in this box. Frankly, we probably could have gotten away with just 3 or 4 different ones. I like to choose a B pencil just because it's not too hard and it's not too soft. And so I'm gonna choose that one. And I'll put that aside. And then here is my sketchbook. And you can see it's an El Cheapo model with the spiral bind. And what we're going to do is draw some lines. So when you grab your sketchbook, the easiest thing to do is take your pencil and draw on it. But you might say, well, most people, they kind of draw like this. They la-di-da-di-da-di, they go and they do their sketches. And they have a kind of loose wrist. To draw well, you need to do a couple of things. First of all, when you hold the pencil, I'm a lefty. Lefties sometimes curl their hands when they draw, and they drag their fingers, so you get this sort of graphite smudge on your fingers. What you want to try and do, you want to hold the pencil a little more upright. Again, lefties and righties who curl are going to have a little bit of a problem with that, but try your best. What that does is it takes the actual point of the pencil and makes it at a consistent angle to the paper. What you don't want to have is, as you're drawing and you're using your wrist, you don't want to have that angle of the point change as your wrist moves. So I'm going to try and lock my wrist and instead use my elbow. There's my elbow. Use my elbow to draw the line. And I'm just going to draw vertical lines. And I'm going to start on the edge of the paper, and I'm going to go about a pencil width away from the edge of the paper. and I'll just draw a line. Now, other things I can do to help me draw a straight line, in addition to using my elbow, locking my wrist, is I can use my finger, one of my fingers anyway, to drag along the edge of the paper. You see how I can get a fairly nice line going from top to bottom, and I'll leave myself a little bit of distance from the end. I'll try and draw another one, again a pencil's width away, again using that same dragging motion. Now of course it's not perfect. You see how it's a little wider there and a little tighter here. The other thing you're going to want to try to do is make the ends of the line a little darker. See how as I draw the line, when I get to the end, I either apply a little more pressure or I go back to make that end a little darker. This is kind of I don't know, an architectural flourish that has been used for years and years, and I think the origin of it is that it helps to read floor plans when those lines are darker at the ends, because when you go and you have a floor plan, that crossing just kind of, it doesn't get lost when they used to blueprint things. So my goal here, I'm trying, again, locking my wrist, using my elbow, not drawing like all loosey-goosey, but I also want a consistent width to the line. Now, already my line here, let me see if I can get that a little closer to the camera, is a little thicker than the first line. Well, we don't want that. We want them to be perfectly the same. So I should go and sharpen my pencil. Now, I don't have a sharpener handy, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to spin my pencil. Now, this is a kind of advanced, very old school skill, but as I draw, if I spin the pencil ever so slightly, it will essentially sharpen the pencil as you go. Now, other things you can do, you can take a blank piece of paper. I'll just take this one because it's here, and you can rub the pencil, and when you make that dark mark, you'll get, it's probably impossible to see on the camera, but you'll get what essentially is a chisel point. You can use sandpaper as well, and that chisel point will also give you a very sharp line. Now, I've gotten fairly far into the drawing, and I have a problem. I've gotten to the point where I can't stretch my pinky far enough, so I need to just drag down without dragging along the edge. Now, here is where, first of all, using your elbow is really going to help, because you're going to be able to keep a straighter line, locking that wrist. The other thing I can do, I can use my pinky swear, to drag along the paper. And what that keeps me from doing is getting my lefty smudge on my finger. But it also helps remind me to keep that wrist locked. The other thing I can do is use my eyes, which here, I'm using these, to look where I'm going to draw. We often watch our eyes go right where the pencil is. See how I'm looking right at my pencil with my eyes? But instead, what I want to do is look down here and make sure that I'm keeping this space relatively consistent. It's hand drawing, so it's okay if it's not perfect. But by using my eyes and not looking just at the pencil point, but instead trying to focus on where the line is going, you have a better shot of kind of making sure that the lines are relatively parallel. For example, I can see that it's ever so slightly wider up here than here. I can adjust that by making the top of this line a little closer to the edge and the bottom a little less close. And now I can get a fairly consistent line. Also, if you're not good at twiddling the pencil as you draw, you can just turn it 90 degrees on every line, and that will probably get you a sharp point. This last line here, I can see I must have said it wrong, but if I turn the pencil, I should get a pretty sharp line the next time down. So fill your page with vertical lines. Obviously, I'm not using the side, dragging my finger along the side with the binder, because that would make for a very jiggly line. Now, I want to draw another set of lines, but this time 90 degrees from where I started. Now to do that, I could leave it like this and draw like this, and in fact, as a lefty, that may be comfortable, but the best thing to do really is to turn your notebook and then use the same technique. And I'm going to start again making the end line darker and pulling with my elbow down to the other end. And see if you can get them exactly spaced. Now, how will I know if it's exactly right? Well, each of these little boxes is going to be a square. Okay, so and I'll just fill this other sheet with lines. And when the time comes, I can just rotate this around and do the same thing on the opposite side. These are all parallel lines, so it doesn't really matter which way the sheet is going. Obviously, I'm having a little crinkling issue. This is some old paper, so it's pretty frightening. It's very vintage, but anyway, you can continue and fill the sheet with these lines to make a complete grid. As you can see, I don't have a very consistent line all the time, but I'm pretty close. This is a pretty good grid. When you get close to the end, you're going to want to make sure that this will fill up. Now, because I started on this side, I already have some lines, so I'm going to want to plan out by making some tick marks. And just, I'll hold that up so you can see them. Those tick marks help me to see where the lines are going to be before drawing them, to make sure that that's going to make... I could divide this into 4, but I think that'll be a little tight. It's not going to be perfect. Again, we hand draw not because it's perfect, but because it is efficacious at allowing us to draw simple elements. So there you go, a beautiful sheet of drawing. Just lines, and good practice for drawing our straight lines. Now, the next step that we're going to do is we're going to learn about line weights. And like I mentioned, I could take this one pencil and just press really hard to get a border, and I'll show you what I mean by that. Let me see, make sure that this shows up on the camera. I can go over this line. I'm going to draw a border. And you can see how by pressing really hard, you can distinguish this line from these other lines. And that's what's known as line weight. And it's just basically a darker line. Now, it is a little thicker as well. I can go back to my box of pencils and choose a much heavier pencil, or a much softer pencil. I'm going to choose a 4B. Not sure if this thing is going to focus on it. And I'll draw the other lines here to make a frame here. And what you'll see, whoops, it's so soft that I do tend to snap that lead off a little bit. Maybe I'll draw that twice because I kind of missed my line. And I'll draw this frame here. Again, try to go over the line as much as possible. I have a tendency when I draw to kind of do this, which is going to give me an inconsistent line, and so I have to fight against my own worst tendencies. But there we go. You can see how now there's a border which is only through line weights. I didn't add any extra, double lines or anything like that. And this is known as line weights. Now, I'd like you to draw that border, but then I'd also like you, turn my paper this way, to draw light lines in between these grid marks that we already have. And to do that, I could take this pencil, or I could take my B and draw, but without pressing very hard. And you can see I can get a fairly light line. And that light line is, in fact, discernible as a different weight from the other lines. However, I think what I'll do, I now have 2 pencils, I'm going to go back to my box and choose a harder lead. That harder lead, I'm going to choose a 2H. It'll just allow me to maintain basically the same pressure all the time, but allow me to draw a lighter line. You see how fine that line is? And I'm using the same techniques that I used before. Locked wrist, draw with the elbow, look at where I'm drawing and not at the pencil lead itself, pencil tip. And I can draw lines that are easily distinguishable by line weights. And really, all architectural drawings, to be representative and easy to understand, you should have at least 3 line weights in each drawing. And you should just tattoo that on the back of your drawing hand, 3 different line weights. A dark line indicates the kind of overall shapes of things. A medium line weight is sort of major divisions in that thing. For example, this might be the outline of a front of a building. These medium line weight might be the windows, and the light line weight is for things like details. So go ahead and fill in all of these lines, then turn your notebook sideways and fill in the lines on the side. And I'll do that right now. And there you have it. The entire sheet is filled with lines, and it is hopefully readily apparent that there are 3 different line weights. Now, this is not meant to do any sort of great architectural rendering. It's really just meant to develop control of your drawing hand. Consistency is really the hardest thing when you are drawing by hand, and it just takes practice. Now, before we move on to actually drawing some floor plans, there's a couple of words that I want you to note as you watch the next video or classroom demonstration. Some we've already talked about: orthographic projection, perspective projection, and then line weights and line types. There's a few other words that we're going to learn, including north arrow, construction lines, jittery lines, and the ground plane. And the big thing that I think I'd like you to figure out is, how is architectural drawing different than just drawing, sketching? I want you to ponder that as we go ahead and do some plans. Depending on how far the in-classroom demonstration gets, you will need to complete it at home. That's called homework. And what I'd like you to do, there's the next video will be called Orthographic Drawing Basics. And so finish the site plan with all the elevations. Then we'll also draw a floor plan with interior elevations. And you can use tracing paper if you want, although I think it's actually easier to just draw it right on the sheet as demonstrated in the video. And be sure to date each page in the corner somewhere. Even a title would be nice. And you'll need to take a photo of that before handing it in, because obviously you can't post your notebook to Canvas. And then our next in-person class, please bring your sketchbook and tracing paper and all your pencils and sharpener, eraser, and tape, just in case. And we will continue with where we left off. Also, I have posted optional readings to Canvas. Some people are better visual learners than actual sort of in-person learners, auditory or whatnot. Some people just need to read it. So if you are one of those people, these pages are from or chapters are from the Ching book on architectural graphics.